Hello, New Prospect. Hope you're doing well. Welcome to RTB 2021 for 1/21/21. This is January 21st, 2021, and I hope you've had a great day so far. Our texts for today are Acts 21, Matthew 21, Genesis 22, and Nehemiah chapter 11. Let's start with Nehemiah 11 for this day. This is a text that's addressing an issue, I believe, that was brought up in Nehemiah 7, where they didn't have enough people in Jerusalem to defend it and to fill it out and to help out with the administration there and all these different things. And so they had all these people living around Jerusalem, and they cast lots to bring people, one out of every 10, to live in Jerusalem. The casting of lots in the Bible, particularly in the Old Testament, are events that are basically, it's placing it in the hands of God. And so the choosing of these individuals to come living in the city was placed in the hands of God. I believe it goes back to something like Proverbs 16, I believe 29 or 30 or 31. I forget the exact verse. Maybe it's 33, where it says the lot is cast into the lap, but its every outcome is from the Lord. And so here we have an example of that. And we have the long list of different people who come and live in the city, and God blesses them. And this is an important event once again in the rebuilding of the people of Israel. We'll skip over to Acts 21. We're skipping all over the place. So we have here Paul coming finally into Jerusalem. So he sails from Miletus to Jerusalem, and notice what he says. There's this prophecy made that he would be captured. In verse 11, there's this prophecy made by Agabus that Paul would be captured, and Paul responds by saying, I'm ready not only to be bound, but even to die in Jerusalem for the name of the Lord Jesus. And so we see Paul's commitment to the cause of Christ even to the very end. And we'll see him come all the way into Jerusalem, and he will be seized ultimately in the temple. Then Matthew 21, we have kind of a similar type of story where Jesus is also entering into Jerusalem for the purpose of being the sacrifice for us. We have the famous triumphal entry where Jesus has a donkey, a colt with her, and they are brought to Jesus. And this was to fulfill Zechariah 9:9 and verse 5 of Matthew 21. As with many of these Old Testament quotations of Matthew, they give some further detail on what's going on in the text. And in this case, just like with, for instance, the baptism, just like with the transfiguration, when you have quotations from the Old Testament, they are specifically identifying something of Jesus's identity for us. And so when this is quoted here, let's just read the verse. It says, "Say to the daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming to you, gentle and mounted on a donkey, even a colt, the foal of a beast of burden." Another way of translating that is humble, mounted on a donkey. This speaks of something of Jesus's character, but there's an important reason for this character. And it goes back to Zechariah. In Zechariah is writing in the immediate post-exile. And as the Israelites look back at the exile through the lens of their experiences there in Babylon, one of the things that they discover, as the prophets teach to them, is that they were led there by these evil, for the most part, Davidic kings in the line of David. And one of the biggest problems, as you read through a book like Chronicles, of these people, these kings, was their pride. If you look at Uzziah, Hezekiah, even Solomon and others, as you read through the book, it's often their chief sin is often the sin of pride. And the book of Chronicles is, as is all these other post-exilic books, waiting for a king who will come along, who will lead the people rightly, won't lead them in a way that will lead them to exile, but instead will lead them in a way that will ultimately lead them into salvation. And the character trait of that individual would be humility. And by entering into the city, Jesus, in this way, though it is a triumphal entry, he's entering not as a triumphant king in the way the world would see it, but as a humble king, one who will be willing to lay down his life for his people. In fact, if you turn over to the book of Philippians, Paul speaks of this humble king in that way by citing from Isaiah 53, uh, the suffering servant who would express his humility by laying down his life for his people. Um, so neat text there in the triumphal entry. And then finally in Genesis 22, this was a text that if you remember during Christmas season, as we were looking at the Messiah through the eyes of Moses, Pastor Drew did a great job of preaching through Genesis 22. This is a story of the sacrifice of Isaac. Of course, it lays down a pattern, doesn't it, of this theme of substitution, where God provides a substitute for one who should have died. And in this case, Isaac was to die, and yet God provides a substitute for him. And that's a theme that you see throughout the book of Genesis, but really throughout the Bible, especially as you get into the sacrificial system, and it's all pointing to the person of Christ. The last thing I'll say about that story is we often will, in fact, it was probably even called this in my Bible, the test of Abraham. And in fact, it was a test of Abraham's faith. But in a way, it's also a test of God. In the ancient world, the gods of the ancient world were all gods of that required things like human sacrifice. And so the question of the text is one of the questions in this text is God that type of God? And he answers very clearly by saying, no, he is not that type of God. He is a different type of God, the type of God that Abraham has faith in, a God who will not require that of us, but instead gives his own son for our sake, a sacrifice for our sin, a suffering, humble servant, as we see in Matthew 21, who will give his life as a ransom for the many. So I hope this has been an encouragement for you. These are some great texts for today, January 21st, 2021. Hope you have a great rest of the day.